Welcome to the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast with your host, Tom Singer. In each episode, we explore the interesting lives of business leaders, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and others who have a healthy dose of the entrepreneurial spirit. It is time to explore something cool. Now, here is your host, Tom Singer.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. Thank you so much for pulling your chair up to the cool kids table. If you've never listened to this show before, you're in store for a treat because today's guest is amazing. What I try to do on this show, and now we are approaching 4 years and 400 episodes, and what I have tried to do from the beginning, and today is no different, is I try to bring a variety of people who are doing cool things as entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business leaders, people who are inside a company, who are entrepreneurial, and just anyone who really can inspire the audience to really do more in your career. Most of the people who listen to this show are either entrepreneurs or they really would like to leave corporate America and start their own thing. And today's guest did just that. She started off working in the media business, sort of in the PR and the magazine world. And she went out and started her own thing. She now helps people get into the news, or as she says, stay out of the news. Today's guest is Adele Cehrs, and she's a good friend of mine. She knows everything you could ever want to know about PR. So in addition to our regular questions, I'm going to ask her a little bit about what you need to know as an entrepreneur to grow your brand and get the publicity that you need. So Adele, welcome to Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do.
Hey, Tom. Thanks so much for having me. It's always good to get on the phone and talk with a friend.
No, it's great. And I've wanted to have you on the show for like 2 years. And every time we chat about business or we talk about something else, we're always like, yes, we'll get that scheduled. And so I want the listeners to know today we were just having one of those calls that friends have where you talk about what's going on with your business, try to give advice. And I said, what are you doing right now? Do you have a half hour? Come share with this audience. So thank you for jumping on.
I love it.
I love people who are willing to play, so thank you for saying yes.
Of course. Why not?
So Adele, tell us about your business. What do you do?
Sure. So about 11 years ago, I opened up my very own agency. I had worked for a big agency on K Street in Washington, D.C., and I kind of got sick of, just always sharing everything that was going on in the agency with, my boss, who did not at all give me any credit for any of the ideas that I came up with or the business I brought in. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. And I just, up and quit. I did not want to have a boss anymore. I thought it was what I needed and what I wanted. And I got that big job. And then when I had it, I said, where's the band? Where's my parade? Okay, yeah, none of that's coming. And oh, by the way, I still have a boss who's stealing my ideas, stealing my concepts. And yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can set out and do it on my own. So when it wasn't as posh to be an entrepreneur, I did it. Didn't you start right out of school working for George Magazine, or is that something I made up in my head? No, you didn't. My first job ever was with John F. Kennedy Jr. And just like funny story. I used to stay there late because I knew I had to work really hard.
Because JFK Jr. was there.
Right, because JFK Jr. was there. Yeah, that wasn't bad either. And also because it was me, a girl from Rutgers, was the first one to graduate college in my immediate family, and 2 girls from Princeton and 2 girls from Harvard, and everybody had Kennedy connections besides me. And I didn't have anything, and so I was like, okay. I was there late one night. And he walked over to my desk and he said my name. He's like, Adele. And I'm like, oh my God, he knows my first name. I cannot believe it. And and he said, I've noticed that you work real hard and, I want to reward you by, going to the Knicks game. Go take my seats. And this is when the Knicks were really good. And I was sitting right next to Spike Lee. And it was just very cool, a moment in my life. So I've had some really lucky breaks. I had some amazing opportunities and doors open for me.
Well, I think there's a lot of women who would have liked to started their careers working for JFK Jr. So that wasn't a bad launch into the work world.
Not terrible. Yeah.
So you sort of shared what led you to taking that jump. You were tired of having a boss take all the credit. You felt that you could go out and do it your own. But I mean, once you made the leap, was it hard?
Oh my gosh, it was so hard. And I stupidly started a luxury marketing PR firm right at the height of the recession. So 2008, it's like, hey, here's a recession. Let me do some
I started
luxury marketing.
I started a luxury PR company and the economy crashed.
Yeah, it's awesome. I did it 3 months prior to the economy crashing, and I was newly married at the time, and my husband's super conservative, and he's like, what the hell are you going to do? Are you actually going to sell stuff? So one of my first clients ever, actually, and this is such a good lesson for anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. One of my first clients ever was Georgetown Cupcake. And, I was such a brand new entrepreneur, and I made some major mistakes and some missteps with that account. And I didn't protect myself as well as I could have. My contracts weren't in play. They were literally my first or second client ever. And they got to be hugely famous. And what happened was I had worked my butt off because I realized that hey, if I make them famous, I'm going to make myself famous. I'm going to make my brand famous. And that wasn't the case, right? They used my my credibility that I built up for them, and really press and so many amazing opportunities. We got them an introduction to TLC, which led to their reality show. And then, a year later, they were like, yeah, you got us so much press. Thanks so much. We don't need you anymore. And that was a major lesson for me, right? And so my husband has an MBA, and he's a professional. And I remember just being so upset. And he's just why are you upset? They just played the business game better than you did. He's like, they didn't pay you that much. You worked your butt off for them. You got them famous, and then
they moved on.
They didn't watch anymore, and then they moved on. And it was a really good lesson. I wish it wasn't such a famous client. I will just put it that way, because there's still a line out and around the door. But it was a good lesson early, because at that point, I then made sure every one of my contracts were really buttoned up. I made sure that I actually charged for what I felt I was worth as an entrepreneur and a service provider. And I feel that really gave me a leg up for some of my friends who maybe were the one person PR firm or marketing agency that went out on their own and didn't necessarily feel confident enough to charge, for what they thought they were worth. So I think that was a really great lesson. Wish I didn't learn it with such a big client, but to have early on. And I would just say to entrepreneurs, make sure you spend a little bit of money up front to get those contracts in place and get those documents in place you need to be a smart entrepreneur.
Well, and it's interesting because you bring up someone like a Georgetown Cupcake, right? I mean, it starts off, it's just a little local cupcake shop, and now it's a household name all over the country. And so when you have good PR, which clearly they did, that can change the course of your business. So not talking about them, but talking about other people who are listening to the show. What do people need to know about PR? Because PR kind of seems like the black arts to me. It's always behind the scenes. It's, sort of hocus pocus. What is the average entrepreneur who has a startup? Why does PR matter, and how can we utilize it to help us?
It is so interesting, because you hear people who are who's the guy on Shark Tank who owns the Dallas Mavericks? What's his name again, Tom?
Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban. So I'm sorry, it's totally blanked on his name. But Mark Cuban, I think is so interesting, right? Because he obviously really took advantage of PR in the beginning of his career, and has been a PR machine throughout his entrepreneurial journey. And one of the things he recommends for startups is not to invest in PR, which is crazy, because he's doing the exact opposite. He's probably just I don't want everybody to know what I know. And you hear there's a lot of different things on the internet. It's if you're a startup, don't invest in PR. And I think that's a mistake for lots of people. I think getting a few great hits in a really credible media source can actually change the trajectory of your business. And that's what happened for Georgetown Cupcake. But I will tell you that with them, and it's a very interesting story, with them, they had a fascinating story to tell, because when I went in there, we talked about it and we said, okay, so what makes your cupcake shop interesting? And they're like, oh, well, we're two girls who left careers in finance and fashion. And I'm like, that's kind of a so what? And they're like, oh yeah, well, our cupcakes are really delicious. I was like, but there's, so what?
They should be if you want to sell them.
I was like, that's good. I was like, these are all so what factors. And it was my job as a strategist to go in there and have a conversation with them and say, okay, what makes you different? What makes you interesting? And what I found is they sold out the cupcakes every single day. And so I was like, well, that's great. And I was like, let's create a line, because if we create the line out the door, then we're going to attract attention. And then the media are going to report on that line. And to this day, over a decade later, there's still a line out the door. And it's still one of the most talked about word of mouth marketing campaigns in the DC area, because that was an interesting story. So I think what PR can do for some startups is really help you hone what your story is, what makes you interesting, and then help you create some trends or some stories that really get momentum build up the business. And then the rest is really up to you. So, you can get some great media, but if you don't do anything with it, if you don't promote it, if you don't come on shows like Tom's, you're not going to take advantage of it in the way it needs to be.
Well, it's so interesting because when I go in and work with companies or law firms or some of my favorite, and I'm teaching them sort of how to get your people engaged in the community. Why do they need to network? Why do they need to be out and participating? One of the most fascinating things is I'll ask the group. I did this with a bank one time, and I said, "What differentiates you from the other banks?" Right? There's a ton of banks in the city. How come your bank stands out? And they literally said, "We're a relationship bank. That's what makes us stand out. Is we're all about the relationship." And I said, that's not really a differentiator, because I used to work for Wells Fargo, and in the employee manual, it actually says we're a relationship bank. And they said, yeah. But the big banks really aren't. And I'm like, yes, but they say they are. And therefore, if they say they are and you say you are, it's not a differentiator. And I see this with law firms too. They're like, oh, we do good work. Well, so does the other firm down the street. This is not your differentiator, of what it is you're doing. And so I do find that interesting that people are like, what's your differentiator? Our cupcakes taste good. Well, God, I hope so. Because, no one's going to buy them. Why do you have a cupcake
shop if your cupcakes are terrible?
Yeah. If you had cupcakes that taste like crap, nobody would have said, leave your finance job and start a cupcake shop. But I do
do that. That's sensible. Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that something as easy as we sell out every day and we have a line is enough to create a story. So for a regular, some other entrepreneur out there, how do you help them identify their story?
I think the way I think I do it is I try to find patterns, right? It's all about trying to find patterns. It's like, what is a little bit more unique than what your competitors offer? What is just a slight tweak? I think here's the thing. I think everybody thinks creativity is this wow, out of the box, crazy idea, right? Like the apple that falls from the tree and just like bops Newton on the head, and all of a sudden he comes up with this brilliant idea for gravity. That's not how it works. That's just not how it works. The best ideas, the best positioning, it really comes out of taking an idea and just taking a twist on it. What is that? Okay, so yeah, it's a cupcake shop, but it's a cupcake shop that sells out every day. It's a cupcake shop that has a line out the door. That's different, right? That's interesting enough, but it's not totally crazy, out of the world crazy, but it's enough to get people to talk. So when you have to be observant, I think, in order to create trends, in order to create stories, in order to create word of mouth marketing, you have to be observant. What gets people to talk? What gets people to laugh? What about your story makes somebody go, that's interesting. Usually your differentiator is somewhere in there.
So another thing that you're a specialist in is crisis PR. And I think this is really fascinating because a lot of people don't want to pay attention to PR until something bad happens and the news crew shows up out front. So what is crisis PR, and why should business owners at least be aware it exists? Even if they don't have a crisis today, why should they be aware that people like you are even in existence?
Yeah, right. So like Olivia Pope makes it look really easy and cool and fashionable, while I would kill figuratively for her wardrobe. I wouldn't actually physically, but which she has the ability to on the show, which I think is just like one of those things where like every PR person clearly is dreaming of that, right? This is Shonda Rhimes injected that into her script, because literally you're helping people when they are most vulnerable, when the companies are going through just a very, very difficult, usually public, situation, and it's up to them to respond in a way that makes the public either, forgive the brand, forgive the company, or forgive the executive who's behind whatever snafu happened, or to rebound faster so the business bottom line isn't impacted as much. And I write for the Wall Street Journal Crisis of the Week column. And a lot of times you see companies who are just masterful at this, who've done a really good job. And there's one example of a pharmaceutical company that just did something very, very interesting. And I think this is crisis communications at its best. So I think they're called Sanofi. They're a huge pharmaceutical company. And I was called by the Wall Street Journal 3 months ago. And they said, hey, they're having a crisis situation. Allegedly, they put this vaccine out in the Philippines, and it may have killed some children, and we're not quite sure, and it might be a bad vaccine. And so, Sanofi was like doing all this. They were doing everything they could to fix it, and they tried to address the problem, and they got some really bad press around it. Well, if that name of that pharmaceutical company sounds familiar, it's because when Roseanne Barr's show got canceled, she tweeted out something racist. And as a result of that tweet, she said, when people confronted her about it, she said, oh, no. The reason why I tweeted that was because I took Ambien. And Sanofi is the company that sells Ambien. And Sanofi was really smart, right? They had crisis communications on the brain because they had clearly just gone through something. They were listening in real time to what was happening in the cultural zeitgeist. And they realized, okay, this is our moment to rebound from that major crisis we just had. So they tweeted out, racism is not a side effect of Ambien.
I remember that.
Right? And it just got viral so fast, and they bounced back so quick and then whatever they did in the Philippines, nobody even paid attention to, right? Nobody even was listening to what had happened. And so if you can respond in real time, if you can understand your crisis, you can get over and let your company get through some of the most tumultuous things that could ever happen to you. So that's a skill that's pretty handy to have.
Sure, and I guess, this really came in, this was before your time by decades, but I remember when Tylenol had its problem back in the 70s or early 80s, and they responded correctly. They pulled everything back. They owned what was going on. It wasn't them. Someone had tampered with their goods, but it created a good scare, and they got in front of the story, and they took ownership of it, and they took a big hit. They recalled everything. But by doing that, and by doing it the way they did it, Tylenol went on to still continue to be one of the biggest brands that we have.
Yeah, it's so true. And even what Nike was doing with, obviously just recently with their ad, there's just so many smart things that companies are doing. And so crisis communications or real-time communication, which I think is the flip of the same coin, is this ability to understand where you're vulnerable, how do you deal with those vulnerabilities, and then how do you respond in real time to what's going on, so that your brand can bounce back and your business doesn't have to be super impacted.
So if a smaller business has a crisis and they need to find somebody, where do they even start? Who do they go to, like in their community, to find somebody to help them fast? Because some of these things, you've got hours or days you don't have forever.
Yeah, well, folks, they should look me up. I can probably help them. It's epic.com. I think what you want to do is you want to figure out, okay, what is the severity of the situation? How bad is it? How bad will it potentially get? And then usually what happens is people will go to their attorney. They'll go to a lawyer. And the lawyer usually has relationships with crisis communicators. I have many relationships with many attorneys. And they usually refer work, or they refer it over, or you can just Google crisis communication expert, that will come up.
Or they can just remember they heard one on Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do, and they can just go through the archives and find Adele.
That's right.
So now that you've been working for yourself for 11 years since you quit that job and said, I'm going out on my own, this is my moment, what do you love about it?
I love that I can make my own schedule, and I also hate that I make my own schedule. I think I am absolutely motivated, and I'm pretty driven. I think what I hate about it is really dealing with a lot of the stickiness that comes with being an entrepreneur, right? There's like such icky things that nobody talks about, like the fact that you have to do HR and payroll and like all these other, if you own a small business, you just have to do, there's a lot of things that you do that other than the thing that you're really good at.
Well, and sometimes I don't have employees, but sometimes if you have employees, then you have to deal with employees. I mean, they bring their own, BS to the table. So all of a sudden you have to deal with that.
Yeah, employees can certainly be, difficult. I think I've had some really great employees and I've had some really bad employees. And I think every entrepreneur has run the spectrum with that. And I think it's about really creating a mission and a goal for your company that everybody is trying to hit. And like every single year in January, I do vision boards. And I love to do a vision board. And it sounds so cheesy, right? You just take a bunch of magazines, you cut some stuff out. But I think it is so important to put your goals up and to make them visual, because every time I wake up, I think every one of us probably has a computer at home. So like I put it in the spot where I have a computer at home, and I wake up, I have my coffee, and I'm staring at my vision board. And it forces me to say, did you hit any of these things this year? Did you do any of these things? And somehow I get most of them done. Like usually, most years I get 10 of 12 goals I put on a vision board. So I would really encourage people to visualize their goals. So I love that part of entrepreneurship. I love the part that I'm in control of my own destiny. The negative part is sometimes employees, is sometimes having some challenging people that you have to work with. Tough.
So what advice do you have for somebody who maybe they're working for an agency or some other type of company and they're ready to just say, I'm out of here? What would you tell them to do?
I would tell them to be cautiously optimistic. And I think the reason why I say that is if you want to get into your own business, one of the things I feel people really don't realize is you're going to have to sell. You're actually going to have to sell yourself, your services, and your product. And you have to get comfortable with pricing yourself accordingly. I can tell you, I know so many entrepreneurs who, do really good work, and just cannot price their services the right way. Feel like sales is icky, feel like marketing or promotions is like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to promote myself. If any of those things is going through your mind as you launch a new business, don't do it. Because yes, I just don't think you'll be cut out for it.
I agree that sales is the key, and I get very emotional about my sales when I have a low quarter where my numbers aren't there. I get down on myself. When I have a great quarter and I set records, I get really high on myself. And so I've tied myself very much as an entrepreneur to, am I selling my services? Because if I don't, then we don't eat. So.
Right. And so if you're not comfortable with selling or promotion or marketing, you can learn. But what I would say is that's a huge wall to climb if you're starting out and you won't sell.
So, Adele, I talk a lot to companies that I work with about what I call the paradox of potential. We all think potential is so great, and somebody starts a business and they and their investors and their friends and their mommy all look at them and say, oh my gosh, you've got so much potential. But then most businesses don't succeed, and yet some do. So there's this gap that exists between potential and results. Why do you think some people get farther across that gap than other people?
I think it's one word, grit. I think you just have to dig into your failures. I think you have to have incredible self-awareness. What did I do if the situation is going really well, how did I make that happen? If the situation is going really poorly, how did I make that happen? And I think after you come to terms with some of those failures or some of those issues, how soon can you get back up and just get back on the horse again and do it again and try again and fail again? I mean, there's a lot of that, I have to fail over and over and over and over again. The truth is I don't think you have to fail over and over again, but you have to fail enough times to realize that you can't be arrogant in entrepreneurship, because every time you're arrogant, you're like, oh, that's going to work. out of the dozen. You have to be adaptable. And I think you just have to realize, like, is it something you are truly passionate about? Because if it isn't, there is somebody out there who may do it better. So how do you just get back up time and time and time again? I think it's grit. Interestingly, I come from a very, very long line of entrepreneurs. My great-grandmother was an entrepreneur in the Depression, which was completely unheard of. And she had a dry goods store in Staten Island, New York, which you can probably hear some of my accent. But she had this dry goods store, and she sold throughout the Depression. And I mean, it's just such an amazing story. Then I have grandfathers on both sides, and I have a great aunt who was an entrepreneur. I almost think it's something that's maybe in your genes, where you just have this need to fulfill something, to sell something.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone's ever done a study about the genetics of entrepreneurship, because if you look at what happened in the 1800s and early 1900s, so many people were entrepreneurial in leaving Europe and other places to come to the United States to be part of this melting pot. And was it those people all had sort of that entrepreneurial, okay, I'll go give it a shot, what's the worst thing that can happen to me thing in their genes, and they all moved to one place, and then they all married and everything else? Do we just have an entrepreneurial gene going on here? Because I definitely think that that's a little piece of the American spirit. Is, I think as a whole, I think we are entrepreneurs. I think that we believe, hey, we can make this better.
I just remember, I remember as a kid going and seeing my grandfather have a business. And he just seemed so cool. He was so my hero, I was just like, oh my God, he's the boss. Like, everybody's listening to him. Like, everybody's paying attention to what he said. And he was a beloved man, like, he really helped his community and gave back and was a pillar of the community in New York. And it's very inspiring. It is very inspiring. And something I hoped to replicate, even though I didn't have any entrepreneurial vision until that one moment where I was like, I can do this. Why can't, if she could do it, I can do it. And I had a lot of that going through my head. So what I would say to people who really want to be entrepreneurs is to just know that it's not going to be an easy path. It's going to be difficult, but the reward is really sweet.
And I loved your choice of the word grit. I think that's awesome. Hey, I've got a couple of more questions for you, but first, I have to thank the sponsor of this episode. So this episode is brought to you by Podfly Productions. Podfly takes the time and the headache out of creating your own podcast. They set you up with the right equipment, training, and guidance to ensure that you're going to sound amazing. Podfly does all the heavy lifting and the technical work so that you can focus on creating great content, growing your audience, and interviewing really cool people like Adele. Hey, if you want to start a podcast, and I know some of you do, jump over right now to podfly.net/coolthings and check out the offer that they have for the listeners of this show. So Adele, I call the show Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. What's the coolest thing you're doing with your business right now?
I think the coolest thing I'm doing is I'm reinventing it. I've had the business for a long time. It's been very successful. As an entrepreneur, I can say with some degree of a humble brag that we are on the top 25 list of firms in the Washington, D.C. area. And that was not an easy feat. And I think, I've come to the point where I now just want to reinvent it. I think PR as we know it is kind of dead. I think it's in a resurgence and a reinvention. People don't call it that anymore. And I think, I am just reinventing myself as I need to, and reinventing the business as I need to. So one of the things I'm going to be doing is focusing on this idea of speed. How do you respond within an hour of an opportunity or a crisis for your business? And I think speed will be the defining factor in how businesses win in the news and digital media game. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting time.
Well, in the world we live in, it's all about, now, right? So I guess speed is the key word. So I think you're onto something really cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I love to ask the people who come onto this show who they admire in the world of entrepreneurship, whether it's somebody famous or it's their dry cleaner. Who do you see out there in the entrepreneur sphere where you say, wow, she's doing something cool or he's doing something cool?
So, oh my gosh, mine is such a pat answer, but I've actually been, this is really interesting, I've been on CNN talking about Elon Musk and his whole masterful media strategy. The way Elon Musk deals with the media, uses the media to his advantage, plays the whole game is fascinating. I think what he's done in the last 2 weeks with being on a podcast and smoking pot, I'm not sure if I think that's the best movie he's ever made, but hey, that's just me. But he's made some other things. He's definitely made some other really critical, smart moves. But what's really fascinating about even his strategy is notice he does something sort of like a gaffe right before he's going to make a major announcement. And I don't think that's not intentional. So he had everybody talking about him taking, being on that podcast, smoking marijuana. And then a week and a half later, he's talking about the fact that his SpaceX rocket is totally sold out. But he's now in your mindset because you're thinking about him on that podcast. And maybe that's a negative, but he's still top of mind. And I just think the way he manipulates the media is fascinating.
Well, it's kind of like he plays both sides of it. That old adage, there's no bad press. He sort of plays the blunders as well as he plays the successes, but we're still talking about him.
We're still talking about him. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there is such thing as bad press. I think that is a misnomer, but I think the fact that he uses the bad press to his advantage is what's so fascinating about him. And if you can see, that's a pattern throughout his career. It's right before he's going to do something cool, he messes something up. And it's almost like he doesn't want to be the hero in his own story. And there's a level of humility that makes the world forgive him and want to talk about him more. Because it's if you're always up,
they want
everybody
to tear you
wants
down.
to knock you off a pedestal, But for him, he's down, then he's up.
Well, I was trying to explain.
I think it's intentional.
I was trying to explain to someone the other day that 20 years after the show Friends debuted, it's not an accident that Jennifer Aniston still is on all the tabloids. That doesn't happen by accident. She's got people behind the scenes who keep her on the tabloids. Because when's the last time you remember her doing something? But the tabloids still are reporting everything, and that is all PR, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely all PR. But the interesting thing is, you do have to be skilled at messing with the media, right? There have been huge stars that have been taken down by the media because they think they could manipulate them. And the thing about it is, it's just Elon Musk has figured it out. Another entrepreneur, and you don't have to be a tech billionaire or a famous, pop star like Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift's beautiful with the media. I mean, she's got amazing strategy behind everything that she does. And I've written a lot of articles about her. I think she's so smart. And what is she under 30? And I think her latest tour is an $80 million adventure. Yeah. I mean, she's an entrepreneur and she's smart.
Yeah, absolutely. And she is, I don't think it's by accident that she dated every famous person you could find.
She's totally courting controversy and she sells more intrigue than actually good music.
So the last question I ask everybody who comes on the show is, what do you do to give back to the greater good? Because I think as entrepreneurs, we got to do more than just make money. I think we have to somehow contribute. So what do you do?
So every year we do a pro bono campaign for one nonprofit. Last year we did something for women in domestic violence. I do a lot of work with nonprofits and associations. I think what they're doing with CSR standpoint is still important. What they're doing to bring about awareness for certain issues is super important. And so I think every business should, in some way give back. And I think the pro bono accounts for us are a really good way for us to learn and to give back to the community. So, and I feel good about it. I think that there is something to that idea that whatever you give, you get back. I think it's true.
No, I think that's awesome. Hey, before I say goodbye, I had one question I wrote down that my wife had asked to ask you, and I think that it's actually a really good question, and I always do everything my wife tells me to do.
That's a smart man.
Yeah, and so I want to go back to the business side just really quick, and that is, how has social media really changed PR? How has Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, how does that affect PR and the job that you do? Because it's got to be something. It's got to be a serious impact in the last 5 or 6 years.
Oh my gosh, it is.
Did we just open up another half hour podcast?
I know. I'm gonna try to condense this down. I think when you come up in a PR role, you are taught that everything needs to be perfect. Every message, every approach, everything needs to be perfect. And the problem with social media is it's not possible. There is an executive that did something wrong. There is someone who tweeted something bad. There is some fire that you are not going to know about, and it's going to creep up into your brand story. And if you are always perfect, someone is going to want to knock you down. And so it's better for you to create whatever controversy, whatever negative angle. It's better for you to control the story than for someone else to just come out of the blue with something that's controversial. So I think this idea that you can control everything has really changed the face of PR. And when social media first came out, I think PR people really missed the boat because they became the cops of the internet. They became the police of everything you should say, not say, and they wanted to just keep it the way it was. And so I think now it requires a level of adaptability, creativity, and you have to get comfortable being vulnerable. That is not something that PR people like to do. So I think that's how it's changed it, is we have to be vulnerable.
Well, Adele, I feel like we just had a master class in PR and crisis communications for the listeners of Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. So thank you so much for giving us, 40 minutes of your time here on the show.
Thank you, Tom. I so appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, this was great. I think this is going to be one of those episodes I get every now and then. I have a guest where everybody emails me and says, we have to know more. How do I find them? So let's just tell them right now. If somebody's like, I have to find this woman, how do they do that? Where do they get in touch with you?
Sure. So you can go to my website. It's epic.com.
Is that itsepic.com?
ITSEPIC. Yep. .com. And you can go check us out there. Yeah. And I write for Inc. and for the Wall Street Journal as well. So check out some of those articles. Yeah,
you've got to go to both Wall Street Journal and Inc. and read the articles that she writes, because they're very, very good. And if you follow her on social media, she usually is pretty good about posting the links to those articles too. So you'll find them all.
Thank you. Hey, Tom, I want to tell you one quick story. Maybe this wouldn't make it, or it might, but just off the cuff. I was watching this Steven Spielberg documentary about how he came up through Hollywood, and I'm a huge Spielberg fan. I'm not sure if you are, but obviously, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, like every single movie we ever saw is there. So they were talking about the first movie he ever made, and he is 159 days over budget. And everybody in Hollywood thinks he's going to fail and fail big. And he's got this mechanical shark. The mechanical shark's not working. He's got to improvise with orange barrels. And, and he wound up. The studio was just about to pull the plug. And then obviously Jaws, debuted. And what is so interesting is it was a huge blockbuster. And Steven Spielberg was so happy that he did it. And he said, it was my free pass. It was my free pass to be as creative as I want, to develop whatever I want. And I would say to people out there, especially entrepreneurs, people who want to do marketing, communications, get out there from a PR standpoint, is you got to be bold. You have to do something that nobody else has done before. And you will create your own free pass when you're able to just get outside your comfort zone.
And I'm finding that sort of even in 10 years into my speaking career, I've finally reached a point where I can just go out on stage and play. and I'm finding I'm a better speaker because of that. And I don't know, necessarily where it all came from. Part of it's come from the stand-up comedy stuff I've done. Part of it comes from having done 800 speeches. But that really resonated with me because I recently did a conference, and the planner of the conference had an idea. And since it was their idea, if it sucked, it wasn't going to look bad on me. And that was before, but it was true. Before the show, I was the master of ceremonies for the conference. And it was a typical big, there was like 3,000 people in the audience. Doors opened at 8:30, show started at 9. At 8:45, they had me run out on stage with a big bag of logoed items from the association. And I came out, and I had been the MC last year, so half the crowd knew who I was. I did a quick introduction of myself, and I told them we were going to have a game show every morning. And I ran down into the audience, and I said, if you're sitting in the front 4 rows, you might get free stuff. And I held up like a $25 collared logoed item and a nice mug. And as people would sit down, we flashed things on the screen that were questions, and people would raise their hands, and I'd make them be silly, and they'd answer the question. Whether they got it right or wrong, they still won the prize. I'd go to the next person. We'd ask another question. And afterwards, the show organizer was like, God, you just owned that. And I said it was I didn't use the word free pass, but it was my free pass to go be really silly because it was their idea. And then I'd run backstage at like 2 minutes to 9. And at 9, I'd come back out in sort of my MC role, and I'd just be who I always am. But it worked. And the reason it worked is it was a free pass. It was like, go out there and be goofy. If people think it's dumb, that's the planner's fault, not mine.
Yeah, I love that. I think this idea, what happens when you first become an entrepreneur is you're so self-conscious. And there are so many people who are like, you might not succeed. You're going to fail for these 5 reasons. And there's so much doubt all around you. And I think one of the best things of being an entrepreneur for a while is you realize that, like, even if you take the chance, even if you take that free pass and you fail, you're still going to be in business the next day.
Yeah.
So I think it's a huge advantage for people who've been in business for a while.
Well, this was a great discussion. So thank you again so much for tuning in. And thank you for everybody who listened, because I say it every time. If it wasn't for the audience, we wouldn't have a show. If you like the show, go leave a review on iTunes. Better yet, go tell your friends. If you listen to Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do and you say, this show sucks less than other podcasts, make sure that all your friends know it. Go out and tell people this is a good show, because the only way people find my show is somebody talks about it. There's too much noise out there. There's too many podcasts. And most people who tell me, I listened to your show, I said, how did you find out about it? They say, one of my friends told me. So if you like today's episode, go and tell a friend. We're going to be back in a couple of days with an interview with somebody just as cool as Adele Cehrs. I know you're thinking, how will you ever find somebody as cool as Adele? But I will. But in the meantime, I'm going to challenge each and every one of you. Go on out there and have a great day.
Thank you for being part of the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast. Without your participation and listening to these conversations, there is no show. Connect with Tom at tomsinger.com and follow him on Twitter at TomSinger.